You ever stare down a piece of paper so ridiculous it feels like a joke from the universe? That was me, standing in the Florida sun, sweat dripping down my temple, staring at a bright yellow notice slapped on my front door like it had something to prove. A $5,000 fine for grass. Not overgrown bushes, not weeds choking the sidewalk, just grass. 2 inches tall. Apparently, that was a full half-inch over the Sunset Palms community standard. What kind of neighborhood measures grass height? Like it's a military haircut? But what made it worse, what made it burn through my bones like acid, was that this wasn't just any neighborhood. This was her kingdom, Barbara Martinez. HOA president, 45, ex-nurse, power-obsessed perfectionist with binoculars for eyes and a clipboard welded to her hand. I had barely been in town for 2 weeks, and she had already fined me more than my rent. I crumpled the notice slowly, stuffing it into my pocket. I could feel the heat of her gaze from across the street. Her window blinds flicked back into place. I didn't even have to look to know she'd been watching. What she didn't know, what no one in Sunset Palms knew, was that I wasn't really who I said I was. To them, I was just Alex Thompson, some down-on-his-luck IT guy with a questionable past and an uneven beard. Unemployed according to my rental application, living off freelance gigs, a little off the grid. But in reality, I was a cop, undercover, 35, badge buried, wire tucked into the hem of my collar, and a federal, handler on speed dial. And Sunset Palms? It wasn't just a quiet retirement community. It was a powder keg of pharmaceuticals, and someone in this bubble-wrapped neighborhood was stealing medication from elderly residents and selling it back into the black market. The operation was sophisticated. The victims? Unknowing. The perpetrator? Still hidden in plain sight, at least until that grass notice showed up. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting from the blinding sun to the dim glow of surveillance monitors blinking back at me. 6 screens. 4 cameras pointed at strategic homes, homes where pills were vanishing and neighbors were too polite or too medicated to notice. In the corner was a live feed from Mrs. Johnson's porch. 78 years old, diabetic, heart problems. A walking target for prescription predators. My cover story had worked perfectly so far. A sealed juvenile record from when I was 19 gave me just enough troubled history to pass as someone suspicious. Someone Barbara would naturally distrust. But what I hadn't expected was just how far she'd go once her suspicions started turning into obsession. The first red flag? I saw it with my own eyes. Barbara, clipboard in hand, ponytail tight, walking into Mrs. Johnson's house like she owned it. That wasn't strange. Barbara always walked like she owned everything, but what she was carrying, that caught my attention. A medical bag. One of those soft-sided ones nurses use. It was the way she cradled it. Deliberate, cautious. Through the blinds, I watched her lean into Mrs. Johnson's living room, smile too wide, tone too sweet. "Just here to help organize your medications, dear," she said. "It's dangerous to mix certain prescriptions. I used to be a nurse, you know." She said it like a badge of honor. But the way her fingers moved? That was inventory. She wasn't organizing, she was counting. She held up a bottle of blood pressure pills, shook her head sadly. "Expired," she said. "I'll dispose of them safely for you." I saw her slip the bottle into her bag. A few hours later, she returned. Same route, same smile. "Got you a generic version, cheaper and just as effective," she told Mrs. Johnson. Then she collected another $100 in cash. I leaned back in my chair, stomach tight, rage building. This wasn't just petty theft. This was strategic. Barbara was lifting expensive meds from Person A, replacing them with sugar pills, then selling those stolen meds to Person B for a discount. And somehow, everyone thought she was doing them a favor. I checked the footage. Later that night, she hit 5 more homes, each time the same pattern. Offer help, swap pills, sell stolen meds back. Thank you, Barbara. You're a godsend, Barbara. You've saved us so much, Barbara. They adored her. She was poisoning them. That would have been enough to trigger the next level of my investigation. But Barbara, she wasn't done. Because as she walked up to my door the next morning with her smug little fine clipboard and her eyes flicking toward my visible monitors displaying pharmacy inventory maps, pill supply chains, red-flagged buyers, her face changed. She saw it. Not job search results. Not IT portfolios. Surveillance.law enforcement grade software. I tried to play it cool. I'm researching government cybersecurity opportunities, I said, clicking the window closed. Tech startups use a lot of similar layouts. She didn't blink. Barbara didn't need to blink. She just smiled that paper-thin smile and handed me another notice. Daily non-compliance fees now in effect, she said. Then she walked away. But I saw the flicker in her eyes. I saw the recognition. She had connected the dots. Alex Thompson wasn't some reformed slacker with a patchy beard. I was something else, and so was she. From that moment on, we weren't just neighbors. We were predators in the same cage. I called my handler that night, Sarah Martinez. Calm, clinical, sharp as a scalpel. Barbara Martinez, I said, pacing in front of my monitors. HOA president, former nurse. She's the one. She's stealing medication from elderly residents, swapping out pills, reselling them. There was silence on the other end. Then, can you get proof? I've got cameras. But she's smart. She's on to me. We can't pull you yet, not until we have enough for federal charges. I leaned on the window frame watching Barbara's house across the street. Her lights were on. Her cameras were turning. She knows something's off. I think she pulled my sealed record. Doesn't matter. That record's legally sealed. She can't use it. She's already using it. The harassment campaign started the next day. A fine for improperly stored garbage bins. A fine for using a vehicle with out-of-state plates. A fine for unauthorized surveillance devices on private property. Day by day, she escalated. Garbage bin? $2,500? Parking my own car in my own driveway? $2,000? She was trying to squeeze me out, push me into leaving, erase me. But the thing about cornering someone trained in tactical survival is you better finish the job. Because if you don't, they'll come for you with everything they've got. Barbara didn't finish the job. She started a war. And by the time she realized who she was really dealing with, the evidence was already stacking up, timestamp by timestamp, frame by frame. I documented it all. Every fake pill bottle, every payment taken, every elderly resident smiling as they were unknowingly robbed. And somewhere deep inside Barbara's carefully manicured shell of perfection, I could feel the panic, starting to form like hairline cracks in porcelain because she had made the first move. But I was going to make the last. She started the next day with a smile so tight it could slice glass. I was watering my front lawn, just enough to meet her absurd moisture visibility standard, when Barbara strolled by with her clipboard like a sheriff patrolling her Wild West. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," she said. "Lawn looks slightly improved." I didn't answer. I just looked up from the hose, watched her eyes flicker from my patchy grass to the camera lens peeking from my porch light fixture. She saw it. She knew I was watching. She didn't care, because in her mind, she was already winning. That day, another notice arrived. This one wasn't even from the HOA. It was from the city. Health code violation. Rotting garbage observed on property. I looked at the citation and nearly laughed. The garbage in question? A sealed trash bag inside my own bin? Barbara was widening the battlefield, enlisting outside authorities, weaponizing the bureaucracy. She didn't just want me out. She wanted me discredited. She wanted me erased. But I wasn't the only one noticing things. Emily Smith, the elementary school teacher who lived 2 houses down, showed up on my doorstep that afternoon holding a foil-wrapped loaf of banana bread. "Hey," she said, "I heard about the fine." I raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" She smiled grimly. "All of them, I guess." I invited her in, carefully shutting the door behind her and scanning the street out of habit. She glanced at my wall of monitors, her eyes widening for a moment before quickly looking away. "Barbara fined my neighbor for leaving a garden gnome out too long," she said, sitting down at my kitchen table. "She's been doing this for a while now, but it's never felt like this before." "Like what?" "Like it's personal." She leaned forward, whispering like someone worried the walls might talk. "It's not just power tripping anymore. She's hunting you." Emily didn't know who I really was. She didn't know about the operation, but she knew human behavior. Teachers read people the way cops do, and Barbara's behavior was no longer administrative. It was desperate. The next 2 days were a barrage. HOA lawyers sent me a threat of civil suit over repeated non-compliance. Someone filed an anonymous report to the police about possible surveillance of elderly residents. My mailbox was mysteriously dented in overnight, but every move she made gave me more ammo. I had video footage of Barbara entering homes with her bag of pill bottles, audio clips of her promising safe replacements, time-stamped receipts from elderly neighbors who had unknowingly paid her to be robbed. The problem was, none of it was enough to prove intent. Not yet. And Barbara? She was on the verge of making a fatal mistake. The climax came with a knock at my door just after dusk. I opened it to find Barbara standing there in her pressed khakis and pastel sweater, holding a noise violation notice in one hand and a smug grin in the other. "This is your 3rd notice," she said. "Several residents have complained." I looked behind me at the completely silent living room. "What noise?" "Your activities, the lights, the equipment, strange hours. You disturb the peace." "You mean my job?" Barbara didn't flinch. "You claim to work, but there's no schedule, no supervisor, no verifiable business. And then there's your past." My blood ran cold. I stepped outside, closing the door gently behind me. "What did you say?" She tilted her head. "Your sealed record. Juvenile charges. Unsealed under HOA background privilege." That wasn't true. Couldn't be. But Barbara had connections. She wasn't a regular HOA busybody. She'd been a nurse. She knew systems, files, databases. Maybe she had a friend. Maybe she hacked something. Either way, she had the one piece of leverage she needed, she thought. "That record doesn't define me," I said slowly. "It's sealed. It's not legal grounds for harassment, but it is grounds for concern," she said smoothly. "And if you won't comply voluntarily, perhaps a community vote is in order." I saw it then. Her plan. She wanted to hold a public meeting, make me the villain, parade my past in front of elderly neighbors terrified of the word felon. Turn me into the threat. The irony was thick enough to drown in. She was stealing their medication, and they were about to defend her. My handler, Sarah, wasn't surprised. "She's pushing you out before you blow it all open," she said. "We've seen this before. It's not just about control, it's survival. She wants to expose me first. Then we expose her faster." "But not yet," I said. "She's planning something bigger. She's not done escalating." I was right. 3 days later, the community meeting was scheduled. "Emergency HOA security review," the notice said. In reality, it was a trial. Barbara prepared like a general going to war. She gathered testimonials, photos of my equipment, lists of violations. She even handed out printed pamphlets. "Is your neighbor safe?" I watched her house through the lens of my hidden driveway cam as she coached her supporters. "He's dangerous. His background is suspect. He could be working for an insurance company trying to take away our affordable care options." It was masterful. Twisted, but masterful. And if I wasn't careful, it was going to work. The night of the meeting, I stood outside the Sunset Palms Community Center wearing a clean button-down and jeans. Nothing intimidating, nothing suspicious. But inside, I was preparing for war. There were over 40 residents seated inside when I entered. Many looked up with blank expressions. Some looked afraid, some just confused. Barbara banged the gavel like she was trying out for judge duty. "Thank you for coming. Tonight's meeting is about safety and suspicion." She began her presentation. Photos of me on a projector. Notes about grass fines, trash violations, parking complaints. "This man has surveillance equipment, works strange hours, claims to be unemployed, has a sealed federal record." A collective murmur filled the room. I stood still. My pulse thudded in my ears. Barbara looked proud, triumphant, and then Emily Smith stood up. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, voice steady, "you fined him $15,000 over lawn height. You've filed city complaints and posted surveillance photos of a private resident. You've crossed a line." Barbara's expression flickered. "Alex deserves to live in peace," Emily continued. "This isn't safety, it's harassment." The room shifted. Mike Foster, contractor, former Marine, raised his hand. "Guy keeps to himself, works hard. I don't see a threat. I see a neighbor." Barbara doubled down. "My medical background gives me insight. He shows signs of manipulative surveillance and predatory behavior." That's when Jenny Davis, the local nurse, spoke up. "Barbara, you don't have a license anymore. You're not a medical expert. You're not a therapist. And honestly, you're not acting like someone who cares about this community. You're acting like someone trying to silence a problem." The silence that followed was electric. Barbara's face turned pale. Her composure cracked. She muttered something about security patterns and background inconsistencies, but the damage was done. The room was divided now. She had her loyal elderly followers, yes, but the tide was turning, and in that moment, she saw it. She wasn't untouchable anymore. As the meeting broke up, Barbara cornered me in the hallway, face tight with fury. "You're ruining everything." "You mean exposing it?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. Try me. This community depends on me. These people would go broke without my help. Or die with it." She stepped closer, dangerously close. "Maybe it's time your past caught up with you." "That a threat?" "No," she said with a smile. "It's a promise." As she walked away, I caught Emily watching from a distance. She hurried over, eyes wide. "She's spiraling. You need to be careful." "I always am," I said. But now, I think she just showed me exactly how far she's willing to go. Because I had a gut-deep feeling that Barbara Martinez was done playing HOA games, and what she had planned next wasn't just about fines or meetings or social humiliation. It was something far darker. And if I didn't stop her in time, someone was going to die. The potluck invitation came 2 days later. Typed, laminated, delivered with a smile by a teenage volunteer who probably didn't even know what he was handing out. "You're invited," it read in pastel script. "Sunset Palms Monthly Community Dinner, hosted by HOA President Barbara Martinez. Bring a dish, bring a friend, let's celebrate community together." It was so ordinary. It was terrifying. Barbara, the same woman who had slapped me with $15,000 in fines, accused me of criminal behavior, dug into my sealed record and whispered threats into my face. Now wanted me to share pasta salad in a community hall? I stood on my porch, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers, because I knew this wasn't hospitality. This was a setup. What kind? I didn't know yet. But my gut had kept me alive. In back alleys, cartel-run border towns, and tenement sting-ops in Brooklyn. And right now, that same gut was screaming one word. Don't. I called Detective Sarah Martinez on our encrypted line that night. "She's inviting me to dinner." There was a pause. "Barbara?" "Yeah, big public potluck. She's going full Stepford." Sarah exhaled slowly. "She's flipping the narrative, setting a trap. She's not going to stop with fines. Not after I challenged her publicly." I scanned the invitation again. The event was scheduled for Saturday, 6:30 p.m., Sunset Palms Community Center. "And she's cooking," I said flatly. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Then, "Do you still have that shellfish allergy kit?" "In the go bag," I said. "You think she'd try something that risky?" Poison is quiet. No evidence. And if your allergy's as severe as your record says, all it takes is one dish. That was the moment I realized Barbara wasn't playing chess anymore. She was playing Russian roulette. And she was loading every chamber. Saturday arrived like a slow storm. The entire neighborhood buzzed with potluck energy. Folding chairs being carried, casseroles cooling on windowsills, paper lanterns hung under the awning of the community center like it was a movie set. But behind the smiles, something was wrong. Could see it in Barbara's eyes the moment I walked in. She was too cheerful. Too polished. Her eyes scanned my plate, my hands, my face, watching for weakness, for signs. "Alex," she called out with syrupy enthusiasm. "So glad you made it." Her voice alone made my skin crawl. "I brought deviled eggs," I said. Holding up the plate, she waved a hand. "Oh, please, you must try my pasta salad. Family recipe, secret ingredients." She chuckled, but her eyes never left mine. I sat down at the long table, greeted by Mrs. Johnson on one side and Mike Foster on the other. Barbara personally placed a generous helping of the pasta salad onto my plate. It smelled normal, looked harmless. Fusilli, herbs, tiny shrimp curls peeking from the edges. Shrimp. My throat tightened, not from the allergy, but from what it meant. Barbara had done her homework. She knew about my severe shellfish allergy. It was buried in my fake medical file, barely visible, nearly forgotten, except she hadn't forgotten. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a death sentence. I smiled, lifted my fork, and took a fake bite, pushing the pasta into my napkin as casually as I could. Then I nodded approvingly and reached for water. Barbara watched like a hawk. Her lips parted slightly, waiting for signs. Itching, swelling, red skin. Nothing, because I wasn't eating it. I made several trips to the drink station just to dispose of the pasta napkins into various trash bins. I faked seconds. I fake chewed. I praised the salad. And Barbara? She kept glancing at her watch. 15 p.m., 7:25 p.m., 7:35 p.m. No reaction, no symptoms, no convulsing, gasping, or clutching of my throat. I was supposed to be dying, but I wasn't. Barbara's smile started to crack. She brought over another helping herself. You didn't eat much. Didn't like it. I'm full, I said, patting my stomach. You know how deviled eggs are. She didn't laugh. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted my empty plate. Something cold ran down my spine. She had a plan B, I could see it in her eyes. When she returned from the kitchen, she accidentally spilled wine on my shirt. Oh no! Come with me. I'll help you clean up. I have club soda in the back. Club soda, sure. Or bleach, or something worse. No worries, I said quickly. I've got a change of clothes back home. Barbara's lips tightened. Of course, she said. Just wanted to help. That word again, help. She said it the same way she'd said it to the elderly neighbors whose hearts she slowly poisoned with fake pills. Help was her camouflage, and it almost worked. When I got home, I pulled the pasta napkin remnants from the trash and placed them under my magnifier lamp. Shell fragments, unusual sheen, chemical oil. I ran a quick field test from my emergency kit. Shellfish extract. Concentrated, not an accident, not a trace, deliberate, and lethal. Barbara had tried to kill me, not with a gun, or a knife, or a break-in, with food, with a smile, with pasta. I called Sarah again. Confirm attempted poisoning. I have evidence. We're moving in, she said, tone flat and final. This is now a federal-level murder attempt. It wasn't just a sting anymore. It was war. That night, Barbara was still cleaning up the potluck when I returned to the community center. She looked up and froze. I waved politely. Forgot my phone, I said. You haven't seen it, have you? Her face said everything. I was supposed to be dead. On the floor. In the hospital. In a body bag. Instead, I was smiling. Alive, and watching her unravel. From across the room, I saw her hands shaking as she dropped the serving tray into a trash bag, along with what remained of the pasta salad. I watched her wipe everything clean. Bleach, gloves, a trained professional erasing her crime. She turned to see me watching her. Our eyes met. The mask fell completely. We both knew. And now, there was no turning back. The next morning, Barbara played her final card. She called the cops. This is Barbara Martinez, HOA president, she said, voice calm and composed. I'm reporting suspicious activity, a neighbor. He's surveilling elderly residents, taking photos. He has expensive electronics, strange hours, sealed criminal record. I think he's dangerous. It was her last attempt to erase me. To bury. Me under suspicion before I could bury her under evidence. 2 local officers arrived, Rodriguez and Davis. I greeted them with a calm, pleasant tone. Sure, officers. Come on in. They saw my monitors, my tech. They asked questions. I answered. They ran my ID. And that was when the house of cards finally collapsed. Because sealed records aren't sealed to law enforcement. Not federal law enforcement. When they saw my background pop up, sealed juvenile charge, expunged, followed by police academy, promotion, and current assignment, they paused. Then came the confirmation note in the system. Active undercover investigation. Contact Detective Sarah Martinez immediately. The officers exchanged glances. They shook my hand. They apologized. Barbara watched all of this from across the street. And when the officers shook my hand, when they smiled, she understood. Her final move had just triggered checkmate. She watched it all unfold from behind her curtains, the kind of curtains you only buy if you're planning to monitor the entire street without being seen. Barbara had always seen herself as the neighborhood's silent protector, the guardian of order. But what she saw that afternoon shattered that illusion into 1,000 jagged pieces. 2 police officers stood in my doorway, nodding respectfully, laughing at something I'd said. One of them even clapped me on the back like we were old friends. Then they shook my hand and left, without arresting me. Barbara's plan had failed, spectacularly. I saw the shift happen in her posture through the window, the drop of her shoulders, the way she pulled her phone to her ear with trembling fingers. I knew that posture. I'd seen it before, on cartel runners, on gang lieutenants, on bank fraudsters, in wiretaps. It was the posture of someone who had just realized they called the cops on a cop, and not just any cop, the one investigating them. Back. Inside, I called Sarah Martinez. She made the call, I said. Tried to use my sealed record to get me arrested. Sarah's voice was tight. And the officers? They confirmed everything, treated me like one of their own. It's done. She knows. Then we're greenlit. Full surveillance. Full warrant prep. But even with federal wheels in motion, I didn't relax. Because I knew Barbara. She wasn't going to run, not yet. She was going to clean. From my cameras, I watched her move with the precision of a nurse and the urgency of a fugitive. Medical. Gloves on. Cabinets opened. File folders removed. Papers burned in a backyard fire pit. Labeled bottles flushed down the toilet. Plastic containers shredded and double-bagged. Laptop drives smashed with what looked like a mortar pestle. She was erasing herself. By sundown, Barbara Martinez no longer existed. And in her place, the ghost of someone named Rebecca Foster was about to reappear. Sarah called back 20 minutes later. Her voice was flat, almost stunned. You're not going to believe this. I might? Facial recognition flagged her. Barbara Martinez. Matches with Rebecca Foster. 90% confidence. I let out a low whistle. That name's familiar. Should be. She's wanted out of Arizona. Pill theft operation. 3 elderly victims dead from swapped meds. A detective poisoned with arsenic. Disappeared in 2021. That cold wave of realization hit me hard. She had done this before. This wasn't her first neighborhood. This wasn't even her first cop. Sarah continued. We're looping in the FBI now. Task force is spinning up. She's not just a pill thief. She's a fugitive with a body count. I stared out my window, watching Barbara, Rebecca, kneeling in her garage, scrubbing medical bags clean like she was prepping for surgery. She's planning to run, I said. Sarah agreed. We need to close this in 24 hours. But Barbara had already made her move. At 4:30 a.m., I caught her on camera loading her SUV with military precision. Cash boxes, medical kits, canned food, backup phone, clothes in compression, sacks, a laptop that wasn't her usual work machine. She was slipping away again. I forwarded the footage to Sarah immediately. She's going mobile. This is happening now. Sarah didn't hesitate. We're mobilizing. Air support, DEA, border coordination. She's going to try to vanish, but we're already running her. I grabbed my field camera and headed to the street just in time to see Barbara pull away from the curb, tires quiet on the asphalt. Her taillights faded down the block, but not before her face turned toward my house. She knew I was watching. It was personal now. Federal task force activation protocols don't make headlines, but when they spin up, they move like thunder. By noon, 15 agents were active. The FBI, DEA, Fugitive Task Force, local law enforcement, all circling Sunset Palms like a net made of steel. Rebecca Foster was officially hunted. Sarah kept me in the loop. She left the SUV at a highway. "Rest stop," she said. "Abandoned it clean. No prints. But we found traces of bleach in the trunk." "She's changing vehicles," I said. "Already did. K9 units tracked scent to a motorcycle stall. Encrypted GPS showed it was pre-staged." I sat back, stunned. "She prepped this years ago," Sarah confirmed. "She had a full escape protocol, motorcycle, fresh ID, backup meds. She's done this before. She's doing it again." What chilled me wasn't her precision. It was her calm. This wasn't panic. It was strategy. By late afternoon, surveillance picked her up on Highway 95 heading toward Miami. Border Patrol was alerted. Coast Guard swept incoming vessels. Her motorcycle weaved between trucks like she had memorized traffic patterns. She had. Sarah told me, "She's using an old nurse's emergency scanner, listening to police comms. She knows what we know." "Not everything," I said. "She doesn't know how fast we adapt." "She's about to find out." I was monitoring live drone feeds by the time federal facial recognition confirmed her identity across multiple systems. Her new ID matched one of Rebecca Foster's old aliases. The system lit up like a Christmas tree. "Contact in Miami just pinged," Sarah said. "Underground clinic, we're moving." The clock was ticking. We had maybe 6 hours before she vanished into a country that wouldn't extradite her, and we'd never find her again. She reached the clinic around 5:45 a.m. The place was nothing more than a low-rise office block hidden behind a cheap strip mall. But inside, it was a ghost hospital. No permits, no staff IDs. Just backroom surgeries, fake prescriptions, criminal cash. Barbara entered wearing a nurse's uniform, disguised as herself, and walked straight into the arms of 15 waiting agents. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She simply raised her hands. "You're under arrest," Agent Hayes said, "for drug theft, elder abuse, and attempted murder of a federal officer." Barbara looked at me as they cuffed her. Her voice was cold, clinical. "You were never supposed to live through that potluck?" I nodded. "You're not the first one to underestimate me." She smiled almost proudly. "But I'm the one you'll remember." They took her away without drama. No tears. No last-minute lunge, just silence. Like a nurse walking out of surgery, her gloves still on. Back at Sunset Palms, the community was in shock. We held an emergency meeting. Emily Smith opened with a simple statement. "Barbara Martinez is not who she said she was." I stood in front of the crowd and dropped the mask. "My name is Detective Alex Thompson. I've been undercover for 6 months investigating prescription drug theft. Barbara, real name Rebecca Foster, was swapping real medication with vitamins, then selling your actual pills online for profit." Mrs. Johnson gasped. "But she helped us." "She helped herself," I said. "To your insulin, your blood pressure meds, your heart pills. Jenny Davis, the real nurse, stepped forward. Some of you are lucky to be alive. She replaced prescription drugs with over-the-counter supplements. I've reviewed several bottles. They're nothing but sugar. The room fell into a hush so deep I could hear someone whisper the Lord's Prayer. Mike Foster broke the silence. She tried to kill you, didn't she? I nodded. At the potluck, shellfish extract, concentrated. Emily spoke next. She cooked it? For you. For me, I confirmed. And for any cop that got too close. I turned to the community. But she didn't win. Barbara's house was seized and turned into a community garden. The pill victims were placed under medical supervision. The HOA rewrote its entire charter. Fines capped, transparency laws, no officer allowed to act without oversight. Emily Smith was elected as the new HOA president. Her first motion, no fines for grass unless you're growing corn. Everyone laughed. I was promoted, detective sergeant, specializing in elderly fraud and pharmaceutical crimes. Sunset Palms would heal, but none of them would forget, and neither would I, because Barbara Martinez thought she could poison a cop and disappear like she had before. But this time, she poisoned the wrong lawn. People don't process betrayal all at once. It lands in layers, like fog drifting across a field, settling into the places you didn't even know were vulnerable. That's what I saw in the eyes of Mrs. Johnson as she sat on the plastic folding chair in the community center, holding a half-empty bottle of pills in her trembling hands. The label read, Lisinopril. The contents? Vitamin B capsules. She said they were generics, Mrs. Johnson whispered. She said they were the same thing. I didn't know what to say. There were no words strong enough to reverse what had already been done. She wasn't alone. A quiet line had formed. Neighbors carrying pill bottles, blister packs, brown paper envelopes labeled with shaky handwriting, morning pills, blood sugar, night meds, all of it tainted. Emily Smith moved gently among them, comforting when she could, directing them toward the medical evaluation station where Dr. Sarah Kim, a crisis physician from the state's Emergency Healthcare Board, had been flown in to assess every potential victim. Jenny Davis, the local nurse, was coordinating care and medication replacement with quiet fury in her eyes. She replaced insulin with B12. She whispered to me, voice strained. I have one patient whose blood sugar levels were borderline coma. I looked across the room and spotted Mrs. Rodriguez slumped in a chair, a blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. I had spoken to her earlier that morning. She saved me money, she'd said. She told me I didn't need all those doses. She said the vitamins would help. I didn't tell her what. I found in her bag calcium pills. She was supposed to be on blood pressure medication. She had been walking around for months, one skipped heartbeat away from a stroke. Barbara hadn't just stolen money. She hadn't just run a scam. She had walked into these people's homes, looked them in the eyes, and fed them lies. And they thanked her for it. The FBI took custody of the Sunset Palm surveillance footage that night. Over 3 terabytes of it. Every visit, every sleight of hand, every pill swapped. They asked me to write a full incident chronology from the moment I received my cover assignment to the moment Barbara Martinez, aka Rebecca Foster, was taken into custody. I wrote for hours. But the part that stayed with me wasn't the undercover work, or the near murder at the potluck, or even the police revealing my real identity in the middle of the street. It was Mrs. Johnson's voice, soft, broken. She told me not to trust pharmacies. She said she used to be a nurse. I believed her. That's the thing with predators like Barbara. They don't show up with knives or guns. They show up with smiles, with a clipboard, with a helping hand. And they wait until you're too tired, too old or too trusting to question them. 2 days after the community meeting, I was invited to a barbecue, not a formal one, not a potluck with poisoned food or HOA banners. Just a few neighbors, folding chairs on the lawn, paper plates and plastic forks, kids running around with Nerf guns. Emily handed me a plate with grilled corn and ribs. "You're staying long enough to eat this time," she said. I smiled. "I'll try." She studied me. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" I nodded, slowly. "Another assignment. Arizona," her brow furrowed. "Another HOA?" I laughed. "Unfortunately. Don't they give you normal jobs like, I don't know, bank robbery, kidnapping, something less terrifying?" "Apparently I have a face that HOA criminals trust," she smirked. "More like a face that Karens underestimate." Mike Foster joined us with a beer in each hand. "Sergeant Thompson," he said, raising one can, "to the man who took down a serial killer in our HOA in one summer." We toasted. Across the lawn, Mrs. Rodriguez sat with her daughter, who had flown in from Tallahassee when she heard about the arrests. She caught my eye and gave a small nod of gratitude. That nod said more than words. We were healing. Slowly. But healing. Sarah called me later that evening. "Federal sentencing just came through," she said. I was sitting on my front steps, watching. The last orange streaks of sunset over the manicured neighborhood Barbara had once ruled like a queen. "Foster?" I asked. 35 years, no parole. Attempted murder of a law enforcement officer, federal drug theft, elder abuse, and fleeing. Arrest. I nodded. "Any restitution?" 300,000 ordered. Civil suits are hitting the HOA's insurance, too. "She won't pay it." "No," Sarah agreed. "But her name's gone. Her network's exposed, and she'll never touch another elderly person again." "Small victories," I said. "Sometimes that's all we get." A week later, Barbara's house was auctioned off. The new HOA board voted unanimously to turn it into a community garden for senior wellness. Fruits, herbs, shaded benches. Emily led the project. Jenny offered medical workshops. Mike built the planter boxes himself. They named it Foster's Folly. Not to honor her, but to remind themselves that predators can hide behind politeness, that you don't always see evil coming, that trusting blindly can cost everything. I visited the garden before I left. Mrs. Johnson was there, watering basil with a quiet grace. When she saw me, she smiled. "You saved my life," she said. I shook my head. "I just told the truth." "That's more than anyone else did." She handed me a sprig of rosemary. "For your next neighborhood," she said. "Maybe it'll keep the Karens away." When I packed up my things, the last item I placed in the box wasn't a badge or a warrant or a set of surveillance drives. It was that original yellow notice, $5,000 HOA violation. Grass height, 2.1 inches. I smiled. Because in the end, that ridiculous fine over lawn length had led to the unraveling of a woman who had escaped justice for 3 years. It had led to the rescue of 15 elderly neighbors, and it had led to a community that now had policies, transparency, and accountability. All because Barbara couldn't stand 2 inches of grass. Funny how karma grows in unexpected places. Some people think justice feels like a hammer, loud, final, absolute. But in my experience, it's more like a heartbeat. Quiet, steady, and only noticeable once the chaos goes silent. Sunset Palms had gone silent. No more absurd violation notices taped to doors. No more HOA emails threatening litigation over mailbox height. No more Barbara Martinez with her pastel sweaters and poisoned pasta. Instead, the sidewalks echoed with the sound of neighbors rediscovering something rare. Trust. You could feel it, in the way Mike Foster waved at passing dog walkers, or how Emily Smith organized her first community game night where no one whispered about fines or hidden agendas. You could feel it in the way Mrs. Johnson sat on her porch and waved at passing cars like she used to, before she thought every visitor might be a scammer or insurance investigator. But for all that healing, there was something else in the air. Guilt. It lingered behind polite smiles. You saw it in the way Mrs. Rodriguez always looked away when people mentioned the word pills. You heard it in Mr. Williams' voice as he tried to explain, again, how he didn't know they were fake, and how Barbara had helped his wife feel better, at least emotionally. The betrayal was personal, and they weren't just angry at her. They were angry at themselves for believing. "I thought she was one of us," Mrs. Johnson told me softly one morning. "She came into our homes. She brought food. She held my hand when my sister died." I nodded. "That's how she did it." Her voice trembled. "Does that make us weak?" "No," I said gently. "It makes you human." But inside I was still struggling too, because I had seen a lot of criminals in my life, and most of them were selfish, petty, sloppy. But Barbara was something else entirely. She had believed what she was doing was necessary, that she was saving the community from the real villains, insurance companies, overpriced pharmacies, a world that didn't care if the elderly were crushed by costs. In her twisted mind, she wasn't stealing, she was redistributing, a hero in her own horror story. That's what made her dangerous. That's what made her effective, and that's what scared me most. Because I'd seen how close even good people had come to believing her. The medical reports from Dr. Kim came in a week later. Sarah forwarded them with a simple note: "Read when alone." So I did. 15 victims, 3 hospitalized, 2 with permanent complications, dozens more with undiagnosed disruptions in medication schedules, meaning they'd been unknowingly damaging their bodies for months. There was one detail that stopped me cold. Patient 11, Mrs. Johnson, evidence of cardiac instability. Heart rhythm irregularities likely exacerbated by vitamin B capsules substituted for prescribed beta blockers. I sat with that line for a long time. I had saved her, but not in time. She was still alive, but she'd never fully recover. Her heart was damaged. Like the community itself. Like me. A few nights later, Emily stopped by unannounced with a 6-pack of root beer and a box of old VHS tapes she found in the HOA storage room. "You're not going to believe this," she said, dropping the tapes on my kitchen counter. "Barbara filmed everything." I frowned. Everything? Board meetings, fines, even interviews with residents. She said it was for transparency. I pulled out a tape labeled June HOA Inspection, Alex's property. I slid it into an old player Mike had loaned me. There I was, watering my lawn, headphones in, completely unaware that I was being filmed from across the street. Barbara's voice was on the tape. Clear. Crisp. "He keeps his blinds closed most of the day. Works odd hours. Very defensive when approached. Likely criminal background." Then came her narration over footage of her walking past my house. Violations noted. Grass slightly over HOA standard. Possible attempt to manipulate lawn optics. During surveillance. I turned to Emily. She had files on everyone, didn't she? Emily nodded. You weren't her first target, just the first one she couldn't scare off. I leaned back, watching myself on the screen. That version of me, head down, maintaining the cover, staying out of trouble, had no idea what was coming. And I wondered how many times Barbara had looked at this tape, thinking she was smarter than me, thinking she'd already won. When I dropped off the tapes at the FBI field office the next morning, Agent Hayes met me outside the gates. She documented everything, I told her, even her thought process. Hayes nodded, flipping through. The log notes. That's common with long-term offenders. They think their system is untouchable. They like to relive the power. Anything useful? Oh yeah, Hayes said with a grim smile. This'll lock her sentence tighter than Fort Knox. She paused, studying me. You did good work, Thompson. You stopped a serial killer. I nodded, and nearly got myself killed with shellfish pasta. Hayes chuckled. We've seen worse. But I didn't laugh, because I kept thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's blood sugar and Mr. Williams's fragile veins, and the quiet way Mrs. Johnson had started sleeping with a nightlight again. Sometimes justice came after the damage. Sometimes justice didn't erase what happened. It just prevented the next tragedy. I had 3 days left before my transfer to Arizona. I spent most of it doing what I never thought I'd enjoy. Pulling weeds at Foster's Folly, the new community garden. Mike installed a plaque by the front gate. It read, "In memory of truth, because lies grow fastest in silence." Every morning, Mrs. Johnson came by to water the rosemary I planted. Every evening, Emily brought tea to the benches near the tomatoes. And every time I looked at the old Martinez house, now stripped of its trophies, its cameras, its masks, I felt something between relief and sadness, because no matter what happened next, this neighborhood would never be the same, and neither would I. The house was quiet on my last night in Sunset Palms. Not the kind of quiet that creeps, the kind that exhales, the kind that only shows up when a place has finally shed the weight of a long storm. Most of my gear was already packed. Surveillance, equipment boxed up, monitors powered down. The wall of photos and pill tracking maps had been dismantled, leaving only faint tape marks and a few thumbtack scars on the drywall. But I couldn't sleep. Too many faces kept drifting through my thoughts. Mrs. Johnson's quiet smile. Emily's resolve. The long line of neighbors who had once believed in Barbara's lies and who now were left trying to pick up the shattered pieces of what they thought was trust. I opened the blinds and looked out across the street. Barbara's old house was completely dark. Boarded up, condemned from the inside out by truth, but her shadow hadn't left. In some ways, I wasn't sure it ever would, because even though Rebecca Foster was now sitting in a federal holding cell, awaiting transfer to a maximum security facility in North Carolina, her legacy had planted roots far deeper than fake flowers or HOA bylaws. She had created fear, and fear doesn't vanish with a sentence. It lingers in the quiet spaces, in the pause before someone accepts help, in the glance over a shoulder, when a new neighbor moves in the unspoken worry that the next friendly volunteer might come with poison tucked behind a smile. I sat at the kitchen table and ran one last scan of my own, not for suspects this time, for peace, and for whatever lesson this operation still had left to teach me. The next morning I found a package on my porch. No name. No return address. Just a single envelope taped to a small square box. Inside the envelope was a card. Typed. Neat. You saved more than lives here. You saved faith. We can't repay that, but we can try to remember. The neighborhood. Inside. The box was a silver key. Attached to it was a laminated card that read, Sunset Palms, HOA, honorary homeowner, no dues required. Emily pulled up moments later, holding 2 to-go coffees and her ever-present clipboard. You weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you? I raised the key with a faint smile. You guys giving me property now? No, she said, handing me the coffee. Just a metaphor. Looks expensive for a metaphor. She shrugged. It's cheaper than losing people who fight for what's right. We sat on the porch in silence for a minute. The morning sun was just starting to stretch across the lawn, and somewhere down the block, a lawnmower buzzed to life, this time without any threat of citation. Did you ever think, Emily said softly, that it would end like this? I shook my head. Not with rosemary gardens and honorary keys. I thought I'd leave through the back of an ambulance or not at all. She looked at me then. Not like I was a cop or a neighbor, but like I was someone real. You didn't. Just bring justice here, Alex. You brought sanity. That's generous, I said. No, she said firmly. That's truth. There's a difference. Before I left, I visited 3 houses. The first was Mrs. Johnson's. She was seated near her window, soft music playing from a vintage stereo and a worn paperback resting in her lap. When she saw me, she waved me in. I heard you're leaving, she said. I nodded. Time for the next storm, she studied me. Are you scared? Always. She smiled. Good. Means your instincts still work. I sat beside her, watching the breeze flutter through the curtains. Can I ask you something? She said after a moment. Anything. When Barbara came into my home, held my hand, told me I'd be okay. Do you think she believed it? I paused. Yes. I think that's what made her so dangerous. Mrs. Johnson nodded slowly. Then I think I'll forgive her someday, but not today. The second house belonged to Mr. Williams. He met me on his front lawn, already trimming his bushes, this time with his actual blood pressure meds in his pocket. You turned this place upside down, he said with a grin. Needed it? Desperately. He motioned toward the garden across the street. See, those benches? Yeah. Every evening people sit there now, talk, share. No more secrets. He tapped his temple. You didn't just expose a killer, son. You exposed our silence. I let those words sit for a second, then nodded. Keep talking, then. He raised his clippers like a salute. The last stop was Emily's classroom. She was packing up after school, boxes of markers and rolled-up posters tucked under her arm. You're not going to get sentimental on me, are you? She asked without looking up. Maybe a little. She set the boxes down and crossed her arms. Arizona. I nodded. Another HOA? Looks like it. President suspected of siphoning neighborhood funds into shell companies. She whistled. Sounds like a party. Always is. We stood there for a moment. You'll come back? She asked. I'm not allowed to keep long roots. Maybe not, she said. But you left seeds. I gestured toward the garden outside her window. You're the one growing them. We shook hands, then hugged, then let go, like two people who knew better than to promise anything they couldn't keep. Back at my house, the car was packed. The front porch light turned off. the rosemary from Mrs. Johnson now tucked into my rearview mirror like a living charm. Before pulling away, I looked one last time down the street. Foster's Folly stood proud and green. Children laughed near the sidewalk. Mike waved from his pickup. Emily stood beside the mailboxes, arms folded, eyes proud. Sunset Palms had been poisoned once, but it had survived. And now? It had something stronger than fear. It had memory. It had truth. And most of all, it had people who would never let silence take root again. I crossed the state line just before midnight. The highway was empty, just me, the hum of tires against pavement, and the occasional road sign blinking past like old memories. I had the radio off. Didn't need sound. Not tonight. The silence had its own voice. It was saying goodbye. But not just to a place, to a war. To a part of myself that had lived under another name, in another town, surrounded by people who didn't know who I really was, but still trusted me with their lives. And to Barbara, or Rebecca, or whatever name she used the first time she lied to someone. She was locked up now, a serial predator finally boxed in by truth. But her legacy would live in every bottle of pills, every HOA fine, every resident who second-guessed the next friendly knock on their door. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a clipboard and calls itself president. Arizona was hot, unforgiving. The neighborhood I'd been assigned to was different, slicker, wealthier. Marble driveways, smart irrigation systems, homes designed like luxury catalog spreads. But the smell was the same, something rotting just beneath the paint. The first notice was already on my door before I'd unpacked. HOA violation. Unauthorized. Window tint. Fine, $750. I almost laughed. Here we go again. My cover was simpler this time. Tech consultant, working remote, fresh off a bad divorce. The usual sympathetic details that deflect suspicion without inviting questions. The board president was a man named Clay Henderson. Polished, charismatic. The kind of guy who shakes your hand and squeezes just a little too long. His teeth were too white. His HOA rules too long. And his eyes? Empty. The kind of eyes that didn't reflect anything back. I'd seen that look before, in Barbara. At the community meet and greet, Clay stood in front of a banner that read, United Neighborhood Strong Values. He welcomed new residents, made jokes about compliance, and handed out branded water bottles like they were candy. Then he said something that stopped me cold. We have zero tolerance for complaints. If you question how we do things here, you might not belong here. He smiled after he said it, but his eyes didn't. That night, I stood on my new porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring at the stars that barely peeked through the desert haze. And I thought about Sunset Palms. I thought about Emily and Mike and Mrs. Johnson's rosemary. I thought about how close that neighborhood came to losing everything under the weight of politeness and silence. And I thought about what would have happened if I hadn't been assigned there, if no one had. The next morning, I filed my first report. Subject, Clay Henderson. Preliminary assessment indicates financial misconduct via shell corporations tied to HOA fines. Secondary concern, psychological. Coercion of board members. Tertiary concern, resident intimidation patterns. At the bottom, I typed a single line. He reminds me of her. Back in Florida, Sunset Palms was rebuilding. The new board, led by Emily, had begun hosting monthly town halls, with open questions, recorded minutes, and public audits. Jenny Davis had turned Barbara's former pill routes into a legitimate medication-sharing network, coordinating with licensed clinics and using grant funds to ensure the elderly never skipped prescriptions again. And Mrs. Johnson? She had started teaching poetry at the local library. Her first reading opened with a line that made every attendee sit up straight. Sometimes the poison wears pearls, and everyone understood exactly who she meant. Weeks later, I got a letter, real envelope, real ink, no email address, no return stamp. Inside was a single photo, the rosemary plant I had given them, now as tall as Mrs. Johnson's porch railing, tucked. Beside it was a note, written in Emily's handwriting. You were never just an assignment, you were our reckoning. Come back any time. The garden remembers. I held that photo for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it in my pocket, just over my heart, where it belonged. There are stories we live through and then forget. But some stories keep living through us. They echo in the small choices. The way we treat the quiet ones. The rules we challenge. The voices we listen to. Barbara Martinez thought her poison would outlast the truth. But the truth grew stronger. It took root. And now, every time a community questions its leaders, every time a neighbor stands up instead of shrinking back, every time a garden grows where lies once lived, that's her true sentence. Because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes, it looks like survival.